Early civilization in India. The objectives are 1. Describe how India's earliest cities provided the foundation for the Aryans. And 2. Examine the caste system, a set of rigid social categories in Indian society. Now, first we'll begin to talk about geography, because geography shapes societies. So, the Indian subcontinent was largely isolated by the Indian Ocean, the Himalayas, and dense jungle. More than any other region that we've kind of discussed is isolated by the geography that surrounds it. Now, the Himalayas, which are fairly famous, are the highest mountain range in the world, and those are to the north and northeast of India, and you can see a satellite image of those mountains here on your screen. You also have dense jungles that really sit in the northeastern region. And then to the south in the subcontinent, further down, you end up getting up to a plateau and more open area. But that Indian Ocean surrounding the Indian subcontinent and the Himalayas really allow for a true isolation and really few invasions of this region, which is completely different than the Mesopotamian river valley. Now, there are a few rivers in this geographical region. Now, the first is the Ganges River, which is kind of a chief regional area for culture even today, but really is surrounded by dense jungle. And so you're not going to have an early civilization really crop up there because the jungle is just too dense. Now, the Indus River Valley, which is to the northwest, is a relatively dry plateau that forms really the backbone of what is now known as the modern state of Pakistan. So that's where you're going to get a lot of the early civilizations kind of establish themselves, like other Indian settlements in the region. But primarily, this is what we'll compare to other river valley civilizations. Now, you have also the Deccan Plateau, which is that plateau which extends from the Ganges River to the southern tip of India, in that southern portion of the subcontinent, which will have a different kind of historical development over time. Now, one of the major geographical features of the Indian subcontinent is the monsoon. So a monsoon is a seasonal wind pattern in Southeast Asia, and throughout history, farmers have depended on these rains brought by monsoons to grow their crops. Many of the people in the plateau regions aren't depending on a major river valley, and the monsoon winds and the storms that come with them are fairly regular. And so over time, we end up seeing a regular pattern develop with farming and inevitably trade, as people can depend upon the flow of the monsoonal winds. Now, the first civilization, as was mentioned earlier, occurs in the Indus River Valley civilization in this region. So as in Mesopotamia and Egypt, right, we see this kind of emerge. This will also emerge in China subsequently after this. But India is fairly early on. Between 3000 BCE and 1500 BCE, we see this river valley, really begin to flourish and a civilization begin to arise. Which, if you'll notice the consistency across the globe of this particular date, 3000 BCE, we see all of a sudden major cities crop up, writing systems develop, right? Civilizations established. So this is kind of a monumental, revolutionary age where we see people really transitioning into this city life away from that nomadic form. Now, there are two major civilizations, two major city-states, as it were, that established themselves in the Indus River Valley civilization. That would be Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And these are really emblematic of the Indus River Valley civilization. Now, just a few notes about these people, and we'll speak broadly. The Harappa settlement, the city, was somewhere around 35,000 people, and Mohenjo-daro around the same, maybe to 40,000. But if you can imagine, that's a large number. That's a lot of people all living together in one place, which is really going to require a strict government and planning and really an advanced kind of civilization and people group. Now, the city itself was a walled city. It was made out of mud brick. You had public wells, which would probably be a true need because many of these people, most of these people would need public kind of works for water and things like that. You would have an advanced drainage system, which is really important for floods and for other issues, maybe waste disposal, not just garbage, but human waste. You had a system of chutes that took household trash from the houses to the street-level garbage bins. I mean, this sounds like some kind of modern innovation, but it's true that these thousands of years ago, these people had developed these problems. So really, only really a well-organized government could have maintained such a carefully structured city. There's no way that a city like this just grew haphazardly, but it was planned and organized and structured and maintained by a hierarchical organization. And that's really one of the major things, is that civilization, in the true sense that we're talking about it, major cities, cannot arise without hierarchical organization, without governance, without structure. Now, of course, many will cite problematic issues that develop from this, but certainly there's the boon of civilization in general. Now, of course, when we talk about major cities, we have to talk about rulers and economy. The Indus River Valley flooded, just like other river systems we've seen, and it did so annually. And it provided rich soil that was deposited on the banks of the river. And, of course, then this would be used to grow various foodstuffs. We have wheat, barley, peas. These tend to be the chief crops in the Indus River Valley civilization. And, of course, being its prime location, it's actually positioned perfectly to trade with ships via the Persian Gulf to the Mesopotamian River Valley civilization. So we're going to see an intimate bond between the Mesopotamian people and the Indus River Valley people, because just going out of those rivers and meeting in the Persian Gulf will become somewhat a natural step for kind of an international trade. Now, inevitably, a moment occurs around 1500 BCE when a nomadic group migrates into the region and conquers the Indus River Valley civilizations. And these people are known as the Aryans. And we've seen these people before. They're a group of Indo-European peoples. They're like the Hittites or any of those other groups. And they moved south across the Hindu Kush and went into the plains through the northern Indian Gap. That is, if you'll notice geographically, India is surrounded by the Indian Ocean, and to the north the Himalayas, and then you have the Hindu Kush that are kind of closing in that gap that is in the northwest, but that really is the space right there that can allow invasion into this region, and in fact is the true other than the modern era, the true only space in which people groups could invade India. So this Aryan group invades India through this region. Now, the Aryans were organized in groups. The Aryans were a pastoral, quasi-nomadic people, and they had a strong warrior tradition, which we'll see this, of course, across the board with Indo-European peoples. Like other places, they introduced iron, and with iron, they're able to transform obviously the metal industry and metalworking in India, but this leads to dramatic improvements in farming. You have the creation of the iron plow, and with the iron plow, this allows the possibility for new, stronger developments of irrigation, and it made possible for the Aryans to clear the dense jungle that grew along the Ganges River and allowed for the settlement along that Ganges River, which ended up being actually quite rich farming land, as one would guess, with such dense vegetation growing all about it. And so we see an expansion of the Aryans into northern India and the conquest and cultivation of new areas by this group. Now, here's what's important. The Aryans had no written language. They had a spoken language, but they had no writing system. By 1000 BCE, 500 years after their initial impact and incursion into the Indian subcontinent, we see a melding between these two people groups. And we can see this primarily through a written language, which is known as Sanskrit. That is, the written language of the Aryans combined as a result of the spoken language of the Aryans and the writing that had developed indigenously in India. Now, what we really see with the Aryans is a melding between what existed in the nomadic group and what existed in India, and this produces an India that we're more familiar with in a traditional classical sense. Now, the Aryans were really divided among themselves among their leaders, known as Rajas, which is a prince, and they carved out small territories, small states, fractured throughout northern India. And so these Rajas set up their own kingdoms, and they established their civilization along a particular strict caste lines. So let's speak a little bit about society in India then, in this kind of social structure, class system. Now, the caste system of ancient India was a set of rigid social categories that determined not only a person's occupation and economic potential, but also his or her position in society. And so what they believed was that these people were born into a particular caste and Varna. So how this works is that in addition to that caste, the Indian society was broadly divided into four major social classes known as Varnas, and then in each Varna, they're born into a jati. So, for example, the four major Varnas are the Brahmin, which are priests largely, Kshatriya, which are warriors, Vaishya, which are merchant landowners, and Sudra, which are commoners, peasants, servants. Now, in these, you end up having jati born within them that are focused on a particular task. So maybe you're a bread maker or a merchant of some sort or a farmer. And so how one was born really determined the position in which they exist within this society. And it's quite strict because there's no fluidity between the regions. So the priests and the warriors are the top Varnas. They're the highest up, the Brahmins and the warriors. And then you have the naturally then merchants and farmers. Below that, the manual laborers, and then someone who's not even on really this pyramid of social structure are the untouchables. Those who conduct menial, degrading tasks according to the civilization. So those who handle trash, those who handle dead bodies, they're really considered non-human or quasi-human. They're not quite as developed as everyone else. And you're going to see really very dense religious and social ideas built around this caste system. And we'll address that when we get to religion, because the religion will completely integrate into this class system and this class view of society and the universe. Now, what does the family unit look like in ancient India? Everyone within a class could marry, but one could never marry outside of one's class. So you had equal class marriage. So someone within a Varna and preferably in a Jati would marry, but one would never marry outside of one's Varna. So you would never see these kind of princess stories where the pauper marries the prince. This would be unthinkable in this civilization. Where you were born, you must remain. And there are religious reasons for this, as we'll see. Now, this society was also dominated by the tradition of arranged marriages, that the young girls would be married off by their parents, usually to older men, of course. This is a typical pattern within ancient civilization at an early age, according to natural functionality, biological ability to reproduce. You also have the dominance of the dowry, where often enough, and dowry is common in ancient cultures, where the husband would pay the family, or the family would pay the family for the privilege of having the daughter, and they would give that to the mom and dad, the dad largely. Or often enough, you would have the family, as in the father and mother of the woman, giving money to the new husband to care for the woman. A dowry was common in terms of exchange. Now, it depends on the culture and the region how that dowry functioned and who is giving it. The husband for the wife, or the wife for the husband. But perhaps what is more striking than any other, and different perhaps than any other culture in the region, and perhaps even in the ancient world, is the practice of sutti, which is a requirement under traditional law. That is, that when a wife becomes a widow, that her husband dies, she must throw herself on her dead husband's body as it burns at the funeral pyre. It becomes a normal practice for the male husband to burn, and this was a typical kind of dealing with the dead rather than burial. And the concept that she must throw herself on the flames and die with her husband is reinforced by the concept of these between the Varnas and this kind of strict class system. They didn't want the wife to live by herself beyond the life of her husband. They were considered one unit, and if one dies, both die. Well, this is at least true of the if the man dies, the woman dies. If the woman dies, a man is not jumping on the pyre with his wife. He'll remarry. Yes, it's not fair in a Western modern notion, but this concept of death and the role of women is important to understanding the mindset of these ancient Indian people. Now, turning then to religion, which is really important to understand these people at the time, Hinduism is really a melding between Aryan beliefs and indigenous Indian beliefs. So Hinduism had its origin in the religious beliefs of the Aryan peoples that settled in India somewhere around 1500 BCE. We see early Hindus, they believed in the existence of a single force in the universe known as Brahman, which, again, you should be familiar with that name because that is the name of the high priests in the Varna system and the caste system in general. So the early Hindus believed in this this kind of universal force that is binding the universe together, Brahman. And it was the duty of the individual self, the individual person, the Atman, to seek to know this ultimate reality, Brahman, which you can see kind of the etymological connection here, the Atman and the Brahman. That the individual person wants to know that force, that universe, that God in a certain sense. Now, don't think monotheistic Christian God, think a kind of primal force, maybe like Star Wars, the Force sort of thing. Now, what became central, and was a central idea within the Aryans and becomes really central and emblematic of the Hinduism in general, is the concept of reincarnation. That is, the belief that the individual soul, the individual person, the Atman, is reborn in a different form after death. That when that body dies, the soul migrates to be born again. Now, this becomes a central theme within Eastern philosophy, particularly Indian religion, and really is reinforced with the caste system. Now, one of the central themes that's connected to the concept of reincarnation is karma. Now, karma is the force generated by a person's actions that determined how the person will be reborn. So, if one does well in life, then they build up good karma. If they do poorly in life, they build bad karma, and then that weighs down the soul or elevates the soul and determines the path of the next reincarnation. So it's not in the sense of the way that the Western American kind of concept of karma. People talk about karma like it's some sort of cliche back of the cereal box sort of thing. Oh, that's karma, I got mine. It's deeper than that, and karma is not the same for every single person. It looks different according to one's dharma. And the concept of dharma, or divine law, is really connected to where one's caste is, and required all that they do for their duty in that caste. For example, if I'm a farmer, then I need to be the best farmer that I can possibly be, because dharma, or divine law, really demands that I live as the best farmer. And so if I live as that best farmer, then I build good karma, and then inevitably when I die, that good karma attached to my Atman, attached to my soul, allows me to transmigrate and to be reborn as I go up the caste system, that caste pyramid. So if I was at the bottom, if I had good karma as a result of following my specific dharma, then I would go up and up and up, ultimately to Brahman, right? So you hopefully you can see that the concept here is that how one lives through their dharma and karma really reinforces the rigid class structure. So you see very, very, very little social mobility. Why? Because the only method by which one can climb the social scale is through reincarnation. In fact, if you had a peasant who tried to be a priest, he would have bad karma because he's breaking his dharma. Your dharma is the guide for your life and the specific rules by which you should live. So it's more complex than the way we've seen it in the past, particularly in the West. And this is, of course, an obstacle, as you'll see later on when we get there, and why many people resisted any kind of Christian ethic of helping the lower person. No, in Indian religion and Hinduism, you shouldn't help lower people, because they need to help themselves, because they need to be true to their dharma and karma so that they can reincarnate into a higher jati. Now, one of the methods by which they could connect their soul and their existence to the divine is through yoga. Now, of course, this has been somewhat morphed in Western tradition, but yoga is a method of training, and it's designed to lead to union or oneness with God. The idea that one would empty themselves, and that through meditation that they would dissolve away and only be aware of Brahman. At least that's the goal. Now, Hinduism in general, however, doesn't just believe in that primal force, but in fact believes in hundreds of deities, nay, I say even thousands of deities. And these are all worshipped in Hinduism. And in fact, many of these gods conflict with each other as well. But this is a true polytheism. And three of the major deities of Hinduism is Brahma, which is the creator. You see Vishnu, which is the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Here's a depiction of Shiva. Now, often these three are seen collectively as Brahman, which are a sort of trinity in Hinduism. So you can kind of see some parallels here to other religions. But the concept is that there are many different gods, and all of them can or should be worshipped in different forms and fashions. Now, the other religion that really dominates and buds in the 6th century BCE is Buddhism. Now, Buddhism emerges out of Hinduism and appeared in northern India, and really eventually came to rival Hinduism temporarily, and as we'll see, will migrate out of India, because Buddhism will not, in the long run, be able to blossom in India due to the caste system. Now, Buddhism is really centered around this central figure, Siddhartha Gautama, and he is known as the Buddha, and the Buddha literally means enlightened one. One who is aware or awake. Now, the story of the Buddha is a fascinating one, and I'm going to give you some highlights, but I'm not going to go into egregious detail. You can read that for yourself. Now, the story goes that in the foothills of the Himalayas in 563, there was a ruling elite family, and their son, Siddhartha Gautama, was protected from pain and suffering to a great extent. That he never saw death, he never saw sickness. In fact, his father ensured that that was not the case, and made sure that his son grew up believing that life was beautiful and wonderful, and there was no such thing as starvation and disease and sickness. So he protected him from those pains of life. But suddenly, on one day, he encountered it. He saw death and disease and sickness. And in reaction, because he is shocked by the existence of this, he pursued divine spiritual answers to the problem of this suffering and pain that he saw. And so he followed the example of various ascetics and holy men in India through Hinduism, and also particular Jainism, as we'll see. And he practiced self-denial. And Jainism in particular demanded that one starve themselves, that they wouldn't indulge in their own flesh, which is a thread that exists in many religions, that the body is evil, the flesh is evil, and the spirit is good, the mind is good. And so what one needs to do is to starve their body, right, to give it pain, to rob it of food and pleasure, so that the soul might be strengthened. And this is technically called Gnosticism, as a theological, philosophical principle. But these ascetics then would starve themselves to death. And that was ultimately the goal. If you could starve yourself to death, if you could die through starvation, then you would elevate beyond the caste system into the ceasing of being, which we'll talk about later. And so these ascetics attempted this, and so did Siddhartha Gautama. And here is an interesting depiction of Siddhartha, that is, the Buddha. Fascinating, because many of us are only familiar with the plump Chinese depiction of the Buddha. And here is a true classical depiction of his dedication to asceticism and starvation. Now, of course, he entered a period of meditation, inevitably, as he rejected this and meditated and thought. And he, in that moment, he reached enlightenment and understood it all. He finally understood. And so here are the basic principles of Buddhism that are thrust upon his mind as he reached enlightenment. Now, the ultimate goal is to reach nirvana. Now, nirvana is not the equivalent of heaven. It is, I suppose, a connection between the two religions, but really, in Buddhism, the goal is to cease to exist, not to exist within an ideal state like heaven in a Western Judeo-Christian concept. Now, really central around Buddhism are the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Now, first, let's deal with the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is that ordinary life is full of suffering. That life is hard and horrible, and that's just a general principle that we need to believe. Second, this suffering is caused by our desire to satisfy ourselves. Right? We cause each other to suffer because we're after our own benefit. And so Siddhartha sees this principle at work everywhere. And three, the way to end suffering is to end desire for selfish goals and to see others as extensions of ourselves. So the goal is to not put yourself at alienation to others, but that through human effort, through your hardship, through your work, that if you can end suffering by destroying human desire, by destroying your desire. And that's really the goal, destroying your own desires. Now, of course, how one does this is through the fourth noble truth. The way to end desire is to follow the middle path. That is the Eightfold Path. Now, okay, if you want to boil it down, the basic aim of Buddhism is to destroy the self, to destroy the desire of self. And so here is the Eightfold Path. One must have right view, that we know the Four Noble Truths. And that's not just like the memorization, but the actual believing. Second, you need the right intention. We need to decide what we really want. Do we really want the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering? 3, right speech. We must seek to speak truth and to speak well of others around us. 4, right action. That the Buddha gave 5 of these precepts of right action. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not be unchaste, do not drink alcohol, do not take drugs. Now, why? Because all of these kind of circulate around the attempt to fulfill desire. So you shouldn't be doing that. 5, right livelihood. We must do work that uplifts our being. We must work and work and work. 6, we must have the right effort. We must actually do this. 7, right mindfulness. You got to keep our minds under control. Inevitably, not just controlling one's actions, but controlling one's thoughts. And then 8, the right concentration. We must meditate to see the world in a new way. And the whole concept of enlightenment is that inevitably, through meditation and through these practices, we will reach a moment where we cease to desire. And that is when you reach enlightenment and can achieve nirvana. Now, the objectives were, 1, describe how India's earliest cities provided the foundation for the Aryans, and 2, examine the caste system, a set of rigid social categories in Indian society.